Today's episode is brought to you by our company, NanoChomp Marketing Strategy and Analytics. We help product and marketing teams solve problems and experience growth using data and approachable AI. Visit nanochomp.com to learn more. Hey everyone, today on the podcast, we have Mike Vindler, founder and CEO of Tronix3D, who's got a really interesting background we're excited to dive into, and friend of the show, Alex Trader, who was one of our first guests, if not the first, maybe first or second guest. He's head of sales at Tronix3D. Tronix3D is a leader in additive manufacturing space, specializing in rapid prototyping and low volume production. Their focus spans design, engineering, production, and they have the ability to create things out of plastics, composites, metals, all kinds of really interesting things that, if you're not familiar with the space, you wouldn't even know are 3D printable. So we're really excited to have you guys here. We're really excited to hear about the story of Tronix. And let's start with a background of each one of you, and then we'll jump into the company. So Mike, thanks for joining, man.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having us on, and I'll cue off my background here. But yeah, so I spent 15 years in R&D in the energy industry. Ended up, kind of developing new processes and tooling for large scale power gen. And I was kind of that entrepreneur kind of position. Where oftentimes I was coming up with my own projects, kind of trying to get budget for them, doing all those things, and so eventually. I was a customer of Tronix3D at first, so I'm not technically the founder, but we did acquire the rights to the company and the equipment. It was a very interesting kind of transaction, and we moved into the city and really reinvented what Tronix3D is, and have really grown it massively since then. So, but I have a ton of background in 3D printing. I've been doing it since 2005. When 3D printing didn't look anything like what it is today.
Sure. Like, you probably can't see it because it's blurred out, but there's like an old school Lulzbot Mini sitting over there on the table, which is completely different realm for what's possible today. But yeah, I would love to take a deeper dive into that. And then Alex, hit us with your background really quickly, how you got here and what you're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's an absolute pleasure to be reconnected with you guys after a couple of years, I think. And I'm on the website. I was the third episode.
Episode 3. Okay.
On your podcast. Yeah, episode 3. The first episode where you did thumbnails. My face is on there. So
you picked the right guy.
Yeah, it's been full circle here, which is cool to see you guys and see how this has transitioned over the last few years. So my background is, I've been in sales roles for the better part of probably 15 years or so. The last 9-10 years, I've been in sales in and around the Pittsburgh region, and have really focused on technology, innovation, startup investment, really just as a champion of our ecosystem as a whole, getting involved with both universities, University of Pittsburgh and CMU, as a business mentor during my time with TrueFit, as a sales director for them, and then, jumped into the DoD space a little bit. The early part of this year, I jumped on board with Mike and team, and the relationship spun out of a multi-year friendship where we just were laughing because it seemed like we had shared calendar in every single networking tech event that surrounded around beer or alcohol. Mike and I were at, and became fast friends. And about 3 years after those happy hour engagements, I jumped on board with the team here.
Awesome. No, really good. Thanks, man. Really appreciate the background. And I'm really excited to hear about not only the technology, but there's so many applications that people don't realize for additive manufacturing right now. They still think of things maybe like my little Lulzbot printer making little plastic figurines, but that's a completely different world now. You can make manufactured parts with them, even using things out of metal. So Mike, let's talk about Tronix, what y'all are working on, what area y'all kind of fit in, and what you've seen over the last couple of years as you've been growing it.
Yeah, I think as far as what area we fit, I think that's one of our key differentiators. So I'll focus on that for a little bit. Is that there's lots of shops out there that are doing additive manufacturing, and if you know what machine you want to print it on, and what material you want to print it out of, and you kind of have all the specs nailed down, right? You can dump it in their website and get a part shipped, right? We work a little differently. We want to work with our customers to identify the real challenges that they're up against, not necessarily just providing a machine to hit print, right? So oftentimes, really what we're doing is, we're talking to customers about how we can solve their supply chain issues, how we can solve a labor challenge, right, by reducing component count, reducing like that, or really just going after those high level challenges. Like one of the biggest things that we do, I think, and where companies see a lot of value, and I'll say that because we actually provide the services to one of our spin-out companies, right? So I have multiple companies now, is that we really oftentimes are helping customers go to market faster, right? And we're able to provide that really rapid iteration and transitioning into low volume production, kind of all at the same time, same space. Like, how do you get parts out to customers quicker? How do you do it in a real way? How do you go from 1 to 1,000 parts really efficiently, really fast? And that's what we can do. So it's exciting.
So it sounds like you have a real high touch consulting component to your business. Is that correct? Do you see that as like your main differentiator? And how is that sort of from an ROI perspective, how is that, helped you guys kind of differentiate in this crowded space?
I think it really helps us, kind of stand out from the crowd, one, right? That's what always companies are trying to do. That high touch point, I think our customers should get more value out of it, right? So we're not talking about trying to compete with other companies by being 10% cheaper, right? We're trying to create more value for our customers. And I think that's, we can talk and, you could say, how do I reduce the piece of plastic by 5%? Whatever, that's fine. How do I move my revenue curve to left by 6 months, right? If you're talking to a CEO or CFO level person, they're going to find tremendous more value out of shifting that revenue curve versus trying to cost reduce by a little bit, right? So I'm not saying that we're trying to be the most expensive or anything like that. We try to be competitive, right? But the way we compete is by bringing value, not by reducing cost. And when you start reducing costs, it's a race to the bottom. You run into quality issues. There's all these kind of downstream effects that people don't realize. And we really take a firm stand that we're providing real value, real quality, all of that, and really taking 3D printing from what you're thinking of, like, we talked about like a desktop machine to like real production, real manufacturing, and taking that kind of stance. So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like, if you're in the fabrication space and you're needed something stamped or cut out of metal, the first thought is like, well, if I don't have the machine, I can go to send, cut, send, and have it here in a week, right? But that's different than, I think I need this part. I want to test this. I want to see if it fits my application. I scanned something and I need that determination of like, how can I build it? How do I manufacture it? What's the next step to make sure I get what I need versus the self-service, or I've already got it in mass production. I need to cut coins here and there. But I think like the applications that you work on are probably extremely important, right? You'd have to be thinking about like, how do I work in defense? How do I work in medical? How do I work in automotive? And some of these 3D printed parts aren't just prototyping like people think, but they're full production, doing very hard duty these days.
Yeah, I think, our customers, and just to give my 10-second elevator pitch and how I engage with clients all the time, is that we're working with everybody from the guy down the street who's literally creating a new fishing bobber in his basement, all the way through to printing parts for nuclear subs and US destroyers, like end use parts for these things, and literally everything in between, and every industry in between, from medtech to energy, robotics, autonomous vehicles, you name it, there is a potential for a 3D print component in that. And to Mike's point, we do have that conversation a lot of shifting that revenue model to the left. But it's about how do you transition from very expensive processes or manufacturing methods, and how can we more rapidly iterate on what it is that is trying to be accomplished.
Are there any industries that surprised you in terms of like demand or interest, where you're like, oh, I didn't see that coming, that you've kind of found a niche?
I would. I'll get into one that I never thought we'd probably get into, and it is energy, and that's my background. But we're making all these industrial scale models, right? And they kind of came to me because I was, I spent 15 years working on that equipment, and then they wanted to scale it down and make a model for training. So obviously I was the right fit, right? I own the 3D printing company. I know, I have experience in the actual equipment that we're making models of, but that's really translated to a lot of other customers. And so making these super high fidelity, small models, right, of things that weigh millions of pounds that you can't ship, right, and that cost millions of dollars to take apart. And we've really gotten into this weird niche where, we've had other people in the market come to us, build these models, and it's a significant source of revenue, like surprisingly.
Mhm.
I think that's one surprising space. And then I wouldn't say it's surprising, but the amount of AI stuff that's going on, right? If you think about AI in general, you're like, what do you need physical hardware for? But we've done a really good job at providing an end-to-end solution for software and vision companies, where we can provide engineering. So they can hand us a circuit board and camera and say, please wrap in plastic, this is the type of environment, this is how I need to mount it. So we can be like a turnkey solution to that. And that's been a really interesting space as well, where we can kind of be an auxiliary mechanical design department, and it kind of unloads them and allows them to focus on what's really valuable to them. The piece of plastic on the outside, is obviously not where their company value is, and we can help kind of take that off their list. So
That's an interesting application. It's like a lot of times when you think about engineering design of completed parts, the packaging is already decided and something's fitting inside of an envelope. But on the other side of it, if you're trying to be very application specific and you're making a tool and then you need to wrap it after the fact, sometimes this is interesting that a lot of people don't realize, the only way to produce some things is via additive manufacturing. Like you can't do it with stamping, casting, taking a billet and cutting it, even if you have a 7-axis machine. Like literally the only way to get some of these complex shapes is through the mechanism that y'all create, which is pretty unique. And we're seeing more and more, I think a lot of people don't realize that metal parts are now created with additive manufacturing from aluminum. Like titanium lends itself really, really well. Are you seeing more demand for that in the space, or is it still like plastics, composites are ruling the majority of what you're building?
So I think the metals is an interesting space, right? And we're just tooling up for metals. We're just starting to print titanium, and we're getting into that. And really, the challenge with metals has been, for every different project, there's almost a different 3D printing technology that's needed, right? And so the space hasn't really consolidated into like a production level environment yet. And so, in order to be, a contract service provider like us, right, where we build parts to spec, we would need 20 metal machines, and each one would only be used a little bit, right, for a specific project. They're much more R&D kind of space. We are starting to see some of these new technologies get a little bit more into production, where when somebody sends us a part file, we can say, yes, we can print that, no, we can't, yes, this is what it costs, right? In the past, metal's always been like, well, we can try it, this is what it would cost to attempt it, how do we change it, right? So there's some new technologies coming out that kind of merges, like MIM, which is metal injection molding, are very known, like parts of iPhone are made with MIM, right?
Mm-hmm.
We basically do that without molds, and we do that in 3D printing with post sintering. So it's a little more production oriented, but not in that I need to make 100 parts. I can just make 100 different parts quickly. So it's kind of good hybrid, and that's where we're going with titanium. And so we've been holding back until we feel like it's in the right space in production. And I played with a lot of metal injection molding in my last job, or a lot of metal 3D printing, in my last job. And, it was always a challenge to get parts out in a real production sense.
That makes sense. And I think when you think about these technology shifts, like the potential is really, really huge. And where you started the conversation was, you think about not only designing it and engineering things, but the cost of tooling. I think people greatly underestimate what the cost of tooling is. And a lot of people don't even know that soft tooling exists, and that you can create a lot of those, relatively, not only parts, but pieces of tool by using additive manufacturing. And I think that opens the door a lot for cost-effective production.
Yeah, we actually we are just also building out some capability to create, when you talk about soft tools, is actually 3D printing part of an injection mold, right? So we can do that, and we're actually going to be bringing a very low cost, low quantity injection molder in house, so that we can be an end to end. Because in a lot of like medical devices, you have to prototype in the exact same material and process, right? It doesn't have to be the same tool per se, but it needs to be the same. It needs to be exactly the same material. And with 3D printing, and materials tend to be tailored to 3D printing, just like injection mold materials are tailored to injection molding. So we're trying to find that right, interesting crossover where we could have injection molded parts like in as little as the same day, just in low quantities for testing. So we are trying to bridge those gaps and kind of create these like hybrid opportunities.
Got it. That makes sense.
I want to go back to, Mike, you mentioned that you've been like 3D printing since 2005. So 20 years kind of in this space. What have, like, I guess what's the most like surprising or interesting thing that you've seen sort of over the last 20 years? And, what excites you about kind of, the future of it?
Yeah, I think when I started 3D printing, right, we actually had a Stratasys machine where I worked, right, and it was probably, I don't know, cost $150,000 or something, some astronomical number in 2005, right, and it doesn't do what a $400 3D printer does today, right,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
when you really think about that drastic shift in the cost of equipment, it's wild, right. And so it's exciting to see that there are 3D printers on every engineer's desk, right? Now, back to what we do, our production machines still cost $500,000 a piece, right, to do production. But it's moving that engineering, that iteration so much faster, and yeah, it's really interesting to see where it goes. I think one of the biggest gaps that we're going to see filled in the future, right, and maybe the near future, is that you still have to know how to do design and engineering in order to go from an idea to a 3D printed part. And so I'm really curious as AI starts to take over these places where you can have, a conversation with AI that can do the design and engineering for you, right? How does that really enable like literally someone receiving a 3D printer in a box from Amazon, almost having a conversation, maybe not with that printer, but with their phone, and then something very bespoke, unique spits out the other end, right? That's like kind of finishing that entire cycle, right? So it's great to have a $500 3D printer on my desk, but if I can't design something for it, it's not of a ton of value. I download a bunch of stuff online, whatever. But it's that design side. So I'm really, really trying to stay up to date on what that AI design space is doing, because that's the key to unlocking all this low cost kind of 3D printing space.
It's like vibe coding for hardware, right?
Yeah.
Like vibe coding and AI has really opened up the ability for people to create applications or solve problems, but the hardware element is still existed. It's like if I want to make a part for a car or anything, right? I have to know how SolidWorks works.
Yep.
And that is a massive learning curve. Even if you try to use something like Tinkercad, I'm just going to make a little teeny thing for my desk. It's still massive learning curve for 3D modeling. And when you have the ability to put AI in the mix, that could make it extremely more accessible, and that changes the game drastically. That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought about that.
Is that like exciting or scary or both?
It's both for sure. I
Yeah.
think the position we're in, it enables what we're doing well. We do charge for engineering. We do have engineers. And I think, I've heard a lot of people are, scared of it taking your job, whatever. I think it's the engineers that use AI will replace the engineers that don't type of situation, right? So I think as long as we stay on that cutting edge and we're enabling that type of thing for our customers, I think we'll be all right. I think there's plenty to be scared of in lots of different ways. I'm not a hater in this space, but man, it's exciting. And I think anything exciting is a little scary as well.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I think that's interesting. So Alex, what are we doing right now to get the awareness level up, to pull in, onboard new customers, and find those opportunities of people that need small production or rapid prototyping? Or are you convincing at this stage, or are people convinced and they just need awareness? Where are we at?
That's a great question. And Mike and I have had many conversations around this over the last several months. One of the things, coming into this additive manufacturing space with zero manufacturing background, it's definitely been kind of downloading from Mike's mind and drinking from the fire hose. My background has been all kind of software innovation, and shifting to physical products, physical componentry. Obviously, we had the IoT me thing a couple of years ago, and we're having a lot of conversations with companies around the Internet of Things and those physical products. But shifting from what those physical products can do and how those physical products are made has definitely been a transition. The go-to-market strategy for me, it's not much different from the software space. It's addressing a different grouping of people. Instead of software engineers and directors of software and that level, it's more, mechanical engineers and directors of hardware. And, they have the same goals, just get there in a different way. I think to answer your question, there is, from what I've seen jumping into this industry, there is a large educational component that we're still trying to solve where you have these, especially the larger companies, where they have the capital to purchase a large investment in a 3D printer, but there is a lack of understanding in how to actually leverage that technology to accomplish the things that they need to accomplish. And so there is a large opportunity for education in the conversations and trying to help individuals within those companies understand where additive manufacturing does and does not fit. What types of things can they leverage the technology to do for them? What types of things can they leverage us as a service bureau to do for them and to offload? So we're not just sitting back and having people reach out to us, all the time. There is going out. Hey, what are you doing? As Mike said, what are the challenges that you're experiencing? If a line goes down in a manufacturing facility, how much are you losing? How can additive manufacturing solve the challenge of you having to reach out to the manufacturer of these lines and wait days or weeks or months for spare parts to come in? Can 3D printing can we have you a part in a day or in a week? How does that change the revenue? When you're keeping those lines going, those are all pieces of kind of the sales conversations that are in this. We've been blessed to work with some really, really, really amazing and interesting companies and are having active conversations with leading technologies globally. Referrals, word of mouth, all that kind of stuff. Prior to Mike, and I'll dig into the background of Tronix3D a little bit. Before Mike's acquisition, Tronix3D was the first company in the world to metal print in niobium. Niobium is come to find out, it's really great for rocket engines. So our space rocket company came in and acquired that portion of the business. And that's what opened up the opportunity for Mike to come in and acquire the rest of it. So Tronix3D has had a very, very good name for a long time. And under Mike's leadership, it's been able to kind of expand in that polymer business. But it's lots of interesting kind of sales strategy conversations that we're having. Trade shows, not necessarily the additive manufacturing shows, because that's more just downloading where the state of the industry is today. It's not really customer focused, but going to DoD-centric trade shows, robotic-centric trade shows, like industry-specific, where we know that we in additive manufacturing as a whole can solve very, very specific and particular issues, going and having that conversation and educating the folks there on what we've done for other clients.
So is that education just more conversations and back and forth? Because I feel like if there's a barrier to like understanding a lot of, you could probably get shut down, so it's like, what's helping you sort of drive that education? Or is it just really like getting your foot in the door and having those conversations? Or is there like marketing material just coming from a marketing background that's really resonating with your target?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I smiled and kind of laughed at that, because another topic that Mike and I have been talking about a lot lately, we're actively looking into over the next 6 to 12 months, moving from where we are, it's about 3,500 square feet, into 12,000 square feet in the same building right above us. Wow. It's really a 5-year plan, but in that plan is to develop out kind of a training scenario, and having like a center of excellence where we've had multiple conversations, even in the last few weeks to month, where organizations are reaching out saying, hey, will you come in? Can we pay you for your time to come in and train our engineers on how to use these technologies? On the defense side of the house, in all the conversations that I've heard, additive manufacturing is a massive interest and could be a huge value add. The challenge is in the military being able to figure out what technologies do we need to acquire? How do we then train the individuals into using those technologies for these specific purposes? And so, where we see a huge opportunity in being able to leverage Mike's expertise in what he did in the energy space for 15 years, kind of downloading that, wrapping curriculum around that, leveraging our engineers' past experiences, his business partner Jason's past experiences, and I think that we could add a lot of value into the additive manufacturing ecosystem globally. in doing that. So it's in process. I will say I'm still learning a ton in the industry. There's still a long ways to go on that, but we're looking to head down those paths because of the need that we see.
And I think you mentioned, people will spend, like big companies will spend all this money, get a 3D printer, they spend 20, 50, 100 grand on something they think is going to work, and then it becomes a toy or it's novel for a couple weeks, and then it collects dust, and then the person that knows SolidWorks doesn't work there anymore, and you have a very expensive, underutilized, depreciating asset, and they wouldn't buy a CNC machine, right? They wouldn't think to do that, or they wouldn't buy a plasma cutter, wouldn't even think to do that. But like, oh, well, we'll just get a 3D printer. But we need to get to a space where you are in the same engineering workflow. When, as an engineer, I'd think, okay, well, I need a fastener, I'm going to McMaster-Carr. Oh, I need to get this plate cut really fast, I'm going to Send Cut Set. Like, and if they're like, oh, I need a complex curve created, designed, and manufactured, we need y'all in the conversation right in that early piece of it, not only for large companies that would eventually cut tooling, but for small companies that want to use it as a production method. And I mentioned earlier, and I think y'all touched on it, there are pieces that can only be created with additive manufacturing. It's just not possible to do it other ways. I think y'all are looking in the medical space and things like that. These are, even though it's a device that might be used for multiple different people or applications, in its exact application, it's used once, or application specific drones and robots, it's used in that configuration and that shape and curve one time. And they need a consistent way to get a good product. And so I think that's a place where you're probably investigating as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important to kind of think about how when you're thinking about design of a part, when you're thinking about manufacturing of a part, how are you separating out, what is 3D printing good at, right? And we have this conversation all the time of like, right, there's, if I want something that's large and flat, I'm going to laser cut it, right? If I want something that's, I don't know, a little more of a complex, I'm going to start thinking about machining, right? And when we talk about 3D printing, a lot of the ways that people think about manufacturing, it kind of goes out the window a little bit. And because especially when we get into like our high volume production, like powder bed machines, right, which can print one part at a time, 100 different parts, whatever. We don't have to worry about the quantity, but we don't charge for complexity, right? And that's one of the very rare technologies, right? Even the filament-based printers, complexity can cost money. When we get into the powder bed systems, complexity is truly free, right? And that unlocks a lot of potential. What's not free is like the size of the part. So if you have really large, low complexity parts, unless you need them tomorrow, 3D printing is probably not a good option, right? If you have smaller parts that are really highly complex, 3D printing, even if you can make it another way, still might be cheaper, right? Because there isn't a tooling cost, right? If you can injection mold something really complicated, but if you have to have like 5 slide outs and whatever, you're, $250,000 into tooling. And even if you need to make 100,000, that amortization can still be expensive, right? So when we talk about 3D printing, when we truly unlock the cost of complexity, it can really start to change your designs, right? So now we can put text inside objects on how to assemble the part better for free, right? So you add value, right? Or how to maintenance it, or how to, how things align, right? We can do all these things. We actually printed inside of a camera housing for an AI vision company. We printed spare parts inside the back of the cover where there was empty space that could break away from the 3D print. Now, because it was inside the cover, they only paid for that little bit of cost of material, which was super low. They didn't pay for the complexity of building those spare parts into these little breakaway tabs. And that way, their entire service team didn't need to carry those spare parts on them. And they always had enough spare parts to service the tool, right? So now you've eliminated an entire supply chain. You've eliminated like a stocking and inventory control. Like you go down this list of things that you're eliminating because we understood that complexity was free, right? And that is the real secret to unlocking like true end use manufacturing versus just like the bridge manufacturing to get me to other tooling or to get me to whatever. That's the unique sauce that we always try to distill. And I think that's the hardest thing for engineers that are used to traditional manufacturing, that are very good at traditional manufacturing and have learned all about traditional manufacturing. We really have to like kind of break their habits in that way.
That's a super clever use case that I wouldn't have thought about. And like there's a saying, it's like you don't think to look behind the door unless you've stood there. And that's really it. It's like, if you're an engineer, you'd be like, oh, well, if you have spare parts, we inventory those and they got to be in a bag and they have to have the right label on them. And then it has to call the customer service and they got to go pull it. And now you eliminate that. Now, like my brain immediately goes to like, man, how many other things are like that are following that use case? And when you talk about your design consulting, like that's one of those things that almost nobody would intuitively get to unless they've already been told or known that that was a thing you could do. That's pretty clever. I never even thought of that.
Yeah, it's exciting. And I think the amount of different use cases that we've gone over with clients, the history I have in engineering, my business partner, he's owned composites manufacturing companies, all sorts of other wild stuff, right? And he's he's like our design savant, right? He leaves the business to me. I let the innovation happen to him, and we cross over in the middle somewhere that creates a little bit of magic. But yeah, that's, like we've come up against so many different challenges and so many different perspectives that if we can bring all of that to the table, we can kind of get people outside of the box thinking for sure.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say so Mike, you have like 5 active companies right now. That makes my head explode a little bit. So I'm curious, how you manage all of that. I know you mentioned you have a business partner, and I'm sure that's quite helpful, but would you consider like maybe the fact that you have 5 a strength, or is that a challenge, or does it vary depending on the day?
Yeah, I think it varies depending on the day is the right answer, right? Finding time to sleep might be challenging at times.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, if I went back, I would do it any other way, right? I think I'm
Mhm.
just driven to these things. I think everything that we've done, the companies we built, we really, between my business partner and I, we in order to do something, we truly feel like we have to do it, right? This is not like a want. This is not, we're not doing a company so we can be rich and famous someday. We're seeing these problems that we're uniquely positioned to solve, and then we're going after them, right? This is not, we started, I think over 8 years ago, we were both racing cars, right? And that's how we met. We probably met in like 2008 or something. But about 8 years ago, we were both racing cars. We both have manufacturing backgrounds. We're like, okay, these parts don't exist. We're making them for our own cars. He was making different parts than I was, and people wanted to buy them, right? And so we were just in that unique position where we were integrated into the community. We had the manufacturing background, and we were already doing it for ourselves. And so that company just kind of formed. That's where we learned to work together, which was super key, right? Where our strengths were, where we had disagreements. The name of that company is I Build Race Cars, and obviously we're going for a lot of SEO on that.
Cool. Yeah.
My business partner Jason loved the dude, but he literally didn't want to join the company with me, even though I was like, you can have half of it. Because it was named I Build Race Cars, and we weren't actually building race cars. Like, he is so literal, and sometimes I love the dude, but like, it was super funny. Eventually he came around, and we that's where we kind of had all of our moments where he's like, that doesn't make sense, and we found our middle grounds, and we did all that, and that just helped all these other companies kind of launch well and know where our space was and know where we could help each other.
That's funny. Like, I mean, I'll jump in because like usually I'll tell anyone who will listen this point, so I'll bring it up. So you and I have racing cars in common then, because I've started racing Hondas, then BMWs, and then a few other things as I've come up and became a racing instructor. So we'll have to definitely nerd out about that. But
Yeah.
That was where I started with 3D printing. It's like I needed to create certain parts and brackets that weren't easy to just bend out of steel or aluminum to like mount various things inside of a car, into a cage, like all that kind of stuff. And it's just like, well, I'm not going to use a zip tie for this. So, you start doing different ideas. That's pretty interesting. But yeah, like to Lauren's point, managing all that's got to be tough. But I guess directionally, there's a common core that's pulling all your interest in business together.
Yeah, I think, and the key was, right, is I knew, Jason is kind of that engineering savant, right? He's tried to run businesses in the past, and he'll fully admit to you that, he's done fine, but the business side of thing is not his part, right? He's that secret sauce. I don't have an MBA, I don't have any of that stuff, but I, have managed to learn my way through it. And not that I'm probably learning something new every day, but that's really where, I really took over, and that's what we learned from the I Build Race Car stuff. So when Tronix3D came up for sale, really my goal and kind of my intention of that was to wrap a prototyping and R&D company around my business partner, Jason, and all of his unique ideas and his kind of toy box of wild stuff that he's invented, wrap some structure around it, wrap a good business around it, do all that, and then give him some freedom to go and kind of chase some opportunities. And really, that's what these other companies have come out of, right? We did start a second racing parts company, like it started Subarus, went to Lotus's, right? So now 2 companies. But the other 2 companies, we have a healthcare technology company called Revobo. And then we have a linear actuator technology that Jason invented. And we're actually building like motion simulation platforms right now. And all of that came out of just like unique experiences, finding the right co-founders, being in the right place at the right time, and having some like really unique perspective on how to solve those challenges. And when you get to that point, you're just like, okay, we just have to start this company, right? There's almost no choice there.
But I think it makes sense. And like, again, having being able to have a foundation that you can rapidly test and iterate off of is super, super helpful. So, like, Alex, where are you fishing next? Like, what are you looking for next? Where are you seeing things growing with the business, and what opportunities are you chasing pretty narrowly?
Well, I will say that our biggest focus right now is the robotic space and then the defense space, right? I mean, there's a lot that's going on in the government ecosystem as a whole. But if we see what's happening out east and we see what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, we see, active drone technology, and we see, drones being manufactured and then sent into the field same day. That's a huge topic of conversation in manufacturing as a whole, shifting from offshore manufacturing and reshoring the manufacturing of those technologies and components. We're having those conversations. So, it's, I will say the top focus is probably robotics, defense is probably next. And then, in these kind of industrial models, we're seeing a whole lot of traction. And I don't think Mike or I ever thought that we'd be getting jazzed up about, selling industrial models, but there's a lot of value there as a company, and our expertise, especially his background, lends a hand to that. One of the interesting things, I think, Derek, you and I actually connected years ago with what Eric Sanchez and I were doing with IoT Media and Entertainment. And doing those events, I've continued over the years to do events and put things together, and have since, joined the board of a local organization here in Pittsburgh. Started out as the VP of Outreach, currently operating as the president of our local chapter. We'll be rolling off of that board sometime in the next couple of months. Once I roll off, it's actually in tandem. It's gonna happen before I roll off. But because Mike and I can't help but start new things all the time, we're actually looking to spin out a manufacturing community here in Pittsburgh,
Cool.
similar to the way that the Pittsburgh Robotics Network operates for the robotics ecosystem. Us will be a community for manufacturers, those companies that are looking to reshore and looking for local manufacturers to accomplish things. An interesting tidbit of information is that Pittsburgh actually has more manufacturing companies than it has coffee shops or restaurants within our region. And so, most people have no idea what they do or that they exist. These are like unnamed buildings, throughout the region of the Pittsburgh area. And we really, with Mike served on the board of the PDMA with me as well as my VP of programming. And so we have the background and have the network and the knowledge to be able to spin something up that truly adds value into a region of the country that can truly operate end to end from ideation through to manufacturing. Mike didn't touch on this, and I'll give him an opportunity to, but the back brace company that they have, Revobo, was exactly that. It was all local providers, local suppliers. It went from concept to product being finished within about a 6-month window, leveraging everybody here locally in Pittsburgh.
Wow.
Do you think that's a unique advantage of Pittsburgh, and how much, of being where you are is, integral to your business and maybe the culture of your company?
Yeah, I'll start, and then Mike, I'm sure you'll have some thoughts on this too. But I think definitely it is a huge value add for our region in Pittsburgh. I think it's definitely not discussed enough, and it's
Mm.
something that Mike and I and some of the other folks that we know that are operating as connectors in Pittsburgh's ecosystem are seeing, and we're starting to talk about. You've got organizations like the Keystone Space Collaborative, who are it's a tri-state collective between Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio, that's pulling together our region as a hub for space manufacturing. It's just so much that's happening from a manufacturing perspective in the city. And one thing that Pittsburgh does very, very poorly is actually communicate those types of things outside of our region, even within our region. Um, and there's a couple of organizations that are working on doing a better job of that. And our mentality is rising tides raise all boats. We have no desire to create an organization that's going to step on toes of other organizations or other communities. We simply want to be the catalyst for raising everybody up, bringing everybody together, to really accomplish those goals. I mean, I always say there's enough pie to go around for everybody.
Yeah, and I love that approach. And I think there's a meme I saw a while back, and it showed this like pristine lab, and it said like what people think 2,000 horsepower engines are built in, and then it shows what they're actually built in, and it's kind of like this dingy space, someone spraying it off with a garden hose, and like the whole thing is like people don't realize a lot of those like nameless buildings. That's the machine shop. That's the guy everyone goes to get a block line hone, or whatever it is. Like, and you'd never know. It's not like some amazing, beautiful building that has great marketing. No, he is the person that can do that within, a thousandth or something along those lines. And you never think about that. And they just kind of stay in their niche. But if you can elevate the whole community up and give access to those amazing resources to more people, I think more can get accomplished more effectively. That's awesome. I like that initiative. So, related to that, we're kind of coming up on time, so want to be respectful of the time. And we've warned you all ahead of time, and we've already got Alex's answer, but we'll ask him anyway. But Mike, we'd like to wrap up on two questions. One of them being, if you could have dinner with yourself at 18 years old, 25 years old, what does that conversation look like? What advice do you give yourself back then?
Oh, that's kind of wild. Yeah, I didn't think about this ahead of time, so I'm just gonna wing it. Um,
Even better.
yeah. So I think the biggest thing is I probably would have stepped out on my own earlier, right? And just been like, take those chances. Um, you know, yeah, take a little bit more risk, right? Working in a big corporate space for 15 years was amazing, an amazing learning opportunity. I did all of that type of stuff, but if I could go back, I would have done it. I would have done it sooner. I would have probably, I had fun in college. I did all of that. I probably would have applied more on the networking and community building side, because I think that's so key to getting, any of these companies off the ground, to being able to, to be an entrepreneur is to not to do it yourself. It's to find the right people to do it with, and the right people to execute on that. And so I think, going back, I think that's where I really needed to do a lot of work when I really got out on my own, and then I completely underestimated, right? So I would say, like, really build those good long-term relationships, even if you don't know what they're useful for today, right? Build them in a genuine way, and then trust yourself a little bit more, and maybe take a little bit of a bigger risk earlier. I don't know. That's probably my best outlook there.
I think that's good. That's really good. Alex, do you got an update to yours? We're not even going to review what yours was. So,
well, good, because it's probably, I don't know if it's the same or different. I think if I was to go back and have a conversation with my 18-year-old self, it would have been to, one, just trust the process. I mean, I speak about this often, even in conversations with my kids. Like, I have literally tripped into every professional space that I have found myself in over the last 15 to 20 years. I tripped into sales, I tripped into technology, I tripped into the defense space, tripped into this stuff with Mike and Tronix in the manufacturing space. I think it would have been to get into sales much earlier on. and to really hone the craft. I've always been very personable. I've always been very engaging. I sell the way that I do and build the relationships the way that I do because that's who I am, not because I was trained to do that. So I think that's I've always been just a very relational creature, but really honing that in much earlier on. And then I would have loved to have gotten into technology earlier than I did. I didn't get into technology until 2015, 2016 in Dallas. I wish that I would have gotten into just the space so much faster. I mean, it's all different. It's changed over the last 10 years. It's definitely changed over the last 20 years. But just being in that space sooner, I think would have done a lot of good professionally.
I do feel like that's similar to what you said, but don't quote me
pretty,
now. I got to go back and
right
listen to episode 3. Well, that's awesome. But the last question we like to ask, so for both of y'all is, what books are you, I mean, Mike, you got 5 companies. Maybe you're not reading a lot. Maybe you don't have a ton of time to read, but what books are you reading? Podcasts are you listening to? It could even be music if that's how you decompress as well. What's on your playlist or what's in your AirPods?
Yeah, so this probably isn't surprising, but I listen to the Acquired podcast a lot.
Oh, it's great.
It's phenomenal. And then the second thing that I listen to, I definitely don't have time for music or anything like that. The second thing I've been doing is, and I'll put this out there because this is, I think, super powerful, is I've been using Notebook LM to build like database of information and then having it create a podcast for me. To listen to on my commute to work, right? So again, I don't have a lot of empty space, but like the commute and things like that, those empty spaces that I do have that are, I can't be reading a book or I can't be doing whatever. I'm actually using AI to create tailored learning experiences around that time. So super cool thing to do in
super nerdy, dude.
Yeah,
super nerdy.
I never stop working.
That's a good use case, and
I love it.
If you want to amplify that up a little bit, there's a tool called N8N. It's a really sick automation tool, and you could actually use N8N to look for things that you're interested in, pull that information out, dump it into the Notebook LM, and then turn it into a podcast from there. It can basically take you out of the loop at the front of that process.
Awesome.
If you wanted
I love it.
super nerdy about it. We can brainstorm about that offline. But team, thanks so much. I think this was a great story.
Oh, wait, we didn't get Alex's.
Yeah.
I gotta know what Alex.
Yeah, I don't necessarily care.
That's not true.
Sorry about that. Man,
I don't do a whole lot of reading, so it's the ADD really kicks in when I sit down and I'm trying to ingest information. I do listen to a lot of music, but it's basically been the same playlist since I was in college and coming out of high school. A lot of emo, a lot of punk, a lot of Blink-182, Mayday Parade. Sure. The Yellow Card just came out with a new album, which is pretty fantastic. So
did the Starting Line. So you need to listen to that.
I saw them in Pittsburgh last month. It was fantastic. So that's my
playlists
release
are the
is
same.
Music. Perfect.
Unchanged.
As you come across new
2006.
stuff, send it my way.
I don't know new things, as you know. It's the same old stuff, but. If any of our old bands, to your point, release a new album, I'll let you know.
Perfect.
We are in a unique era where you have these like rock stars that are 60 years old, 50 years old, still touring and singing their hits that are, a little bit more moody than you'd expect a 60-year-old to sing. But that's the generation we're living in right now, I suppose.
Guys, I saw Creed and Finger 11 and Three Doors Down last year when they came to Pittsburgh, and I was just in my divorced dad rock heyday. It was fantastic. I loved it.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's amazing. I bet you weren't the only one there. The only one with the same vibes.
100%.
Oh my God, it's so
awesome.
good.
Well, team, thanks so much for joining us. Really exciting to hear what you're working on. Love to continue the conversation in the future. Great to see how the space is moving, how the evolution of 3D manufacturing is continuing to evolve, and we're really excited to see what happens with Tronix3D in the next coming years. Thanks so much for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you.
Appreciate it, guys.